up, guys, and welcome back to the Walkout Podcast.
where we cover fights, news, and more.
And last week we previewed UFC 317, which took place last Saturday. And today we're going to be recapping the entire main card, starting with the main event, Ilia Topuria versus Charles Oliveira. What were your reaction to this fight?
Yeah, it was a really impressive performance from Ilia here when he knocked out Charles in the first round with only, I think, 2 minutes on the clock. So,
Yeah, something like that.
yeah, so really impressive in his first lightweight bout for the title also. And now
Yeah.
he's the 2 division champ, or at least he has held 2 belts because,
Yeah, and he
yeah,
got both of them in the octagon as well, even though he's not officially the featherweight anymore.
yeah, exactly.
Still held up both the belts. And like you said, a really impressive performance just to flatline someone like Charles Oliveira like that. We haven't seen that in a long time, even though he's faced some of the best guys, the Bronx. So quite a statement, we have to say. Even though we predicted it, it's still surprised me in some way to see someone do that so easily against Charles Oliveira. It's really impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree that even though we predicted first or second round early finish for Ilya here, early knockout, we did not really expect it to be in this fashion. Just the way he completely dropped him with that initial right hook, I think it was.
Yeah, he was out cold from the first punch, and then he did a follow up, but it wasn't necessary. He was already completely out of it.
Yeah,
Charles there, which we rarely see. And like we said in the previews, he has taken a lot of damage before, but never looked like that. And some people might say that it's all the damage over the years that accumulated up to this point and made him get knocked out. But I don't think we should take the credit away from Ilya in that sense. And another major point that we discussed in the preview was that this weight jump for Ilia Topuria from feather to lightweight is a very big one. And often we see, like with Conor McGregor, that the weight class jump doesn't really work, so to speak, for them. That the power just disappears when you jump from featherweight to lightweight. But Ilia Topuria really disproved that point, right?
yeah, absolutely. I think that the power really transferred. I mean, we saw that with that knockout. Maybe it's even improved. I don't know. Because the fight was so short that we didn't really see, like, it wasn't similar at all, I think, to the Volk or to the Max fight, in the sense that there wasn't really any wobbly moments where Ilya, for example, threw a punch at Charles and he got wobbled at first and then maybe later again finished him. It was just like we said, Charles was just out cold from that first right hook.
Yeah,
Very impressive. So
yeah, he barely even had to work for it. It's just that power he has in his hands, Ilia Topuria. And I mean, in the crowd after the fight, there were several people there. Obviously, Ilia Topuria, he led on to the fact of someone with a bad back, which most people thought was Arman Tsarukyan, but for some reason, Joe Rogan
Joe
pulled up
Rogan
Paddy
hijacked it.
Pimblett in the cage.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're talking about Paddy Pimblett in the cage, and they had their face off. But I mean, there are probably 3 top-tier contenders in the lightweight division right now: Gaethje, Pimblett, and Tsarukyan. Some people will argue Makachev. I know is still ranked at number 1, Makachev, in the lightweight division, but he has been bulking up for a potential welterweight fight. What do you
Yeah,
think
I
should be
think
next for Ilia Topuria?
I think that Arman is the fight that is the only really in terms of technical skill and what he could bring to the fight. I think he's the only true contender really, but he messed up, and I think that actually some people are like, just give Arman the title shot again, but I
Yeah,
think he needs to work for it. I think he messed up when he missed that weight and he messed around with a reporter, Nina Drama.
yeah,
And I think that the UFC or Dana White has made the right choice to basically just say, you're not even in this game yet, bud. You need to really work yourself up from the ground again. before we give you another title shot. And so I think
Yeah, and that's a
that,
big point because
yeah,
sorry to interrupt you there, but
no, it's fine.
Sarukian, he fought for over a year ago was his last fight, I believe, and that was the fight against Charles Oliveira on UFC 300, which he won, I believe, by a split decision. And I
Yeah,
know that MMA math doesn't always work in that way, but looking at Topuria's performance versus Oliveira and Sarukian's performance against Oliveira, also considering that they're only 1 year apart, they're night and day in the, I mean, just the sheer comparison between the two.
yeah,
Ilia flatlined him, and Sarukian took into split decision that some people, I believe, thought Charles won in that
yeah.
fight. So having a layoff of a year there for Sarukian and coming back to get a title fight, that shouldn't be the play. And as you said there, Dana White doesn't believe that either from everything he says. So that's probably not next. I mean, other contenders, obviously the one who entered the cage, Paddy Pimblett. Do you think that's a fight to make, or is it too soon for Paddy?
I think that from Paddy's own perspective, in terms of what level of fighter he is right now, I think that for him it would be better to take maybe a fight or two before facing
Yeah,
someone like Ilya. But the truth of this lightweight division right now is that there simply isn't anyone at all on the same level as Ilya or as
yeah, not
Islam.
close, right?
Yeah, there, like I was thinking before, like, okay, who from this division can beat Ilya? And I just can't think of a single one. The only one who maybe can take a round or something of Ilya, maybe Arman, maybe Max again if they will have a rematch. But even then, I mean, it's gonna be the same end result, I think, for all of those guys. They're all gonna get knocked out, losing some way or another. I don't really see anyone at 155 beating him as of currently. So I think that when planning his next fight, I think it's more about just which is going to be the biggest fight in terms of selling pay-per-views maybe. And I think that Paddy is just the bigger because they have had beef before, and Paddy is at least like he's at least a young guy, which is some people are saying basically right now that Ilias is only fighting old fighters, but that's because
Yeah, yeah,
those are the guys who are the best, still are the best in their respective divisions. It's not like Charles, it's
yeah,
not like Ilya said, he himself before the fight with Charles said basically that I apologize, I didn't want to fight you because he wanted to fight Islam for the belt. But Islam isn't there anymore, he's moving up to welterweight. And so he has to fight these guys anyways. But I think that Paddy is a more interesting fight than Gaethje simply because it's at least, it's not another just old fighter who's gonna get knocked out. Who's, I mean, Gaethje is worth them. He's not on the same level as Max, so I don't see him lasting longer at all or as
no,
long.
exactly,
While Paddy's at
exactly that.
least like you do you agree? Like Paddy's at least a different kind of matchup, more stronger, better shin, probably, you know, better
Yeah,
grappler.
and he's a bit of a, can you call him maybe a dark horse in the fact that
Yeah,
he hasn't
little bit.
lost in the UFC, I think, yet. He's
No,
lost on as an amateur, but not in the UFC. He hasn't faced that good competition, but when he has always come out victorious. So I think that brings some jeopardy into it and makes it a fight that people would want to see. And as you said, it kills those rumors of Ilya only fighting older guys, which is, I've seen that a lot as well. But I mean, yeah, he fought older guys, but it's still Volkanovski at somewhere around 34, 35. Max, still a very good fighter coming off that knockout against Gaethje. Oliveira still ranked, I think it's ranked at number 2 or 3 or
yeah, he
something.
was the number one
I mean,
contender before this, I think, or the
yeah,
number two
exactly. So
contender,
he's not
probably.
fighting washed up 45-year-olds. They're still
No,
the elite guys, right? But as you said, I think it's a totally different game with Paddy. And just something, we don't know how good Paddy is, right? Because they're taking it quite slow with him. But last time out against Chandler, he did look really impressive. So I also agree that that might be the fight to make. I mean, in regards of Gaethje, who is the only other one, that's a lot because Gaethje, he has said that he won't, he will retire Gaethje
yeah,
if he doesn't get a title fight. But that doesn't make sense. I mean, he got flatlined by Max, and Max got flatlined by Topuria. So why would anyone really want to see that fight when Gaethje is quite old as well? So,
yeah.
but you mentioned there the Makhachev fight. Is it possible, do you think, to make the Makhachev fight at the moment?
I don't think so at the moment, probably. I think that the only real likelihood of that happening will be if, let's say, either Islam wins his belt against JDM, and then Ilia moves up immediately after the Paddy fight, probably, or his next fight, if it's going to be Paddy or Gaethje, we don't know. I think it's going to be Paddy, like we talked about, the most probable matchup. But so that could happen, or it will be if Islam would lose against JDM, which I don't think it's likely at all, but I do think I think that there's a larger possibility of that happening than it was, for example, that Ilia would lose against Charles. I think that it's an interesting fight, actually. A lot of people are just going to say that I think that Islam is going to smoke EDM, but I think that's a really interesting fight. We're going to cover that later when that card comes up. But I think that it's not likely at all, but it could happen that he loses that and then has to go back down and face Ilia at lightweight. But I don't think that he's just going to stop his bulk to welterweight. He's having some trouble with it, but I think he's going to stick with it anyway. I don't think he's going to go back down right now and he's going to take a fight against Ilia right now. I think he's going to be a couple of, probably a year or something before we see that. Maybe next International Fight Week. What do you think?
Yeah, I totally have to agree with that prediction that you just said there. I mean, Islam has just bulked up a bit. We'll have to see. I think it's interesting to see if the fight between Gaethje and Pimblett takes place later this year. I know Dricus du Plessis, there's a viral clip of him leaking that fight. I think he said it's going to be on the same card that he fights on, which I believe is in August between him and Hamzat on the 319 card.
Yeah.
And if that takes place, I think the winner will probably get Ilia Topuria, maybe in the end of the year, probably in the start of 2026, maybe. But as you said, even though everyone would want the Makhachev Ilia Topuria fight, I don't think it's the one that's going to happen anytime soon. But if the UFC know what they're doing, they should make it somewhere down the line. And it will be an even bigger fight if they wait, maybe, like you said, around a year more, so that they each can get maybe one or two more wins. And then it will be a massive fight if they both continue on winning. But yeah, and for Oliveira, I mean, a really hard loss for him, obviously, to get flatlined and knocked out cold like that. What do you think's next for Charles Oliveira?
I think that after coming off such a tragic knockout, really, in terms of just how drastic it was and dramatic, I think that he needs to face someone maybe up and coming, someone lower, not unranked, but maybe like, what's the guy on the number 15? I think it's Grant Dawson, I think his name is.
Yeah.
That could be a decent matchup for Charles to still show that
Yeah.
he's still in this division, he's not out of it. But also, you know, giving some breathing room at least, not having to face Arman or Max or Gaethje. I don't want him to go up against another boxer really in the next
No.
few months or year.
Yeah, surely he should just take some time off, right?
Yeah,
And fight maybe somewhere, probably close to a year away from now, and hope that he can do a Volkanovski and recover well from that kind of a knockout. But it's tough, right? All right, so moving on down the card, we had a bout between Alexandre Pantoja versus Kai France for the flyweight championship. And as I predicted here, Pantoja coming out with the submission win. What did you think of his performance here against Kai France?
I thought it was really dominant, even really impressive. One of the most, I mean, we had so many impressive performances, I think, on the card, at least in the top 3 fights. But this was a really impressive, just dominant win over basically the most threatening contender in his division right now, I think. Kai Kara was.
Yeah, that's fair to say.
Before this fight, and the odds were actually pretty similar. I think it was almost a bit disrespectful to Pantoja. I thought the odds would be a lot more in his favor. I mean, Kai Kara has power, but he doesn't have like Topuria knockout power. He has some power, but he's not even that well rounded, I believe. in comparison to Pantoja. So I think that he really did a really good job here in showing everyone just how good he is in this flyweight division. And it reminds me a lot of Merab versus O'Malley, basically, in the sense that he really showed a lot of doubters. I think that he's just so dominant, and he's gonna keep being dominant, basically. What did you think?
I mean, Pantoja just did what Pantoja does, right? And we got this spot on in the preview, I think, when we said this, that Pantoja is so well-rounded that he finds the area where his opponent is the worst, and he takes the fight there, a bit like Volkanovski does. He's pretty good at everything. He has no real weak spots. So when he has an opponent like France, who has some really good strength, but he also has some weaker areas of his game, he takes the fights to the weaker areas and he finds a way to win. And he does that again and again and again against different opponents with different strengths. And that's what makes it so impressive. So yeah, really impressed by this win. I mean, the similarities between the Merab and O'Malley fights are really there, like you mentioned, regarding that it wasn't actually a submission
but
here as well.
I'd even argue though that this was even more dominant, because even in the striking, I think that Pantoja is completely overwhelmed him. While, for example, in the Merab versus O'Malley, both of those fights, sure, Merab improved in the second fight on the feet, but I think that both of those fights were at least really competitive on the feet. But this was just a complete domination from Pantoja, I think, both on the feet, basically, and on the ground as well. He just swarmed Kaikara, and really impressive.
Yeah, 100%. And we can't underestimate how impressive it is from Pantoja to do this against the contenders one after the other. Oftentimes, a champion will fight someone and look really good, and then they have to fight another style, and they often end up coming short. But Pantoja does it time after time, so we really have to give him credit for that. And yeah, a really solid and impressive performance from him here, having wiped out most of the names in the rankings. But there is one guy, I think, for Pantoja that jumped the rankings all the way up to the number one spot, and his name is Joshua Van. What did you make of his performance against Brandon Royval?
Oh my God, I mean, this guy, he might be one of my most favorite fighters right now, Joshua Van. Just the way that he has just cruised through, or bulldozed through, this 2025 so far. I think he's fought 3 or 4 times already. This was maybe his 4th fight or 3rd fight already in 2025.
Yeah, this year, right?
Yeah, I think it was his 3rd fight or something this year. Just, I mean, and the 2nd one in a month as well.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And he went from fighting in the prelims against unranked guys, and just swarming them with his 200 plus significant strikes per fight, basically. And then he went up and did the same thing against Brandon Royval, the number 1 contender, ranked contender. I think he was the number 1 ranked contender, right, in the flyweights.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It was.
And just, Royval himself I think is pretty known for, being a volume striker. But he just got outstruck by Joshua Van, number 12 ranked guy who before his earlier fight this month wasn't even ranked. So super impressed by Joshua Van, and particularly just his boxing skill and his cardio, and the way he didn't get tired at all during the fight, basically. And he ended up knocking, Royval down at the end of the fight. So I think that absolutely Pantoja versus Van is the next fight to make. I'm a bit nervous though, still, again, for Van, for his sake. I think that he has decently good takedown defense, but still, I mean, damn, I don't see Pantoja losing anyway anytime soon. But I think that will be competitive, at least. It will be more competitive than Royval versus Pantoja was, even, I think so. What do you think about that potential matchup? Or this fight also?
It's a really interesting one. Like you said, I have to give you some credit as well, because you predicted that it would be a huge output from Joshua Van, and it really was, right?
Yeah,
I've seen a lot of people say that this was an all-time classic of a fight, definitely one of the greatest flyweight fights ever,
yeah,
and
absolutely
very possibly one of the greatest UFC fighters ever fights. Sorry.
Yeah.
ever, and it should be included in the Hall of Fame for fights, I think. So, yeah, a super entertaining matchup, really impressive. I mean, like I said, he fought a month ago, Joshua Van. That's insane.
Yeah, on the
And it's
last
only,
pay-per-view event.
yeah, and now he's
In
back.
UFC
I mean,
316, and he's back for UFC 317. I mean, I wish we could have more fighters like this who just show up every event to fight. It's insane.
yeah, definitely. And that's why I think it's correct, like you said, that they give him the title shot just to reward him for that,
Yeah.
for the activity, how entertaining he is, the fact that he's only, I think, is it 23 or 24 years old and this active?
I think he's 23.
Really
Yeah,
impressive.
super young also.
Yeah. So even though I have to agree with you that would slightly possibly lean towards Pantoja since he's so skilled, but it's an interesting fight, and Pantoja is a fun fighter in himself. So facing someone like Joshua Van, I think, will bring the best out of him. So that's really has to be the next fight to make, possibly maybe in the end of the year. Let's see if Joshua Van
do you see that fight being basically one of the biggest flyweights fights in the past 10 years, something, right? Pantoja and Van, that has to be one of the biggest, just based on, I mean, Joshua Van is already a UFC star, basically, in the span of a month. And Pantoja, you know, with his latest performance now, which is Kaikara, I think he has also gained a lot more respect. So, super big matchup, super big fights.
I really agree with that. Since the flyweights don't get that much attention as well, but this one will definitely, because Pantoja, like we said, he has wiped out almost all of the division except for one guy, and that's Joshua Van. So that's really the fight to make. And as you said, one of the biggest flyweights fights in a long time, and one that will draw a lot of eyes onto it. Since, like you said, Joshua Van, with his activity, has gained a lot of following very quickly, and is, for all the right reasons, a lot of people's new favorite fighter. And Pantoja is one of the, we have to say, I think, one of the goats of the sport at this point. Definitely of the flyweight division, him and Dimitri Johnson there. So yeah, definitely the fight to make for those two, right?
Absolutely.
So moving on down the card, we had Beneil Dariush claiming the victory against Renato Moicano. What did you make of his performance here in this fight?
Yeah, I mean, I think it wasn't that surprising. To be honest, it was a fight of two old lightweights, not legends, but old, at least lightweight fighters who have been there for some time, who basically scrapped it out over the bag, over staying relevant in the division. And, you know, the first round I think was pretty exciting, at least. Moicano got like a knockdown. They were trading a lot, and then the second round, Darius just started landing his takedowns and also started landing a lot more, some ground and pound, I think. And then in the third round, both of them were just, I think I remember, both of them were just so, you know, so gassed that the third round was, yeah, it wasn't anything really worth watching. It was just, I think, Darius taking down Moicano 2 times more. And they won a unanimous decision. And I don't think that, do you agree with my statement that it wasn't really surprising? Anyways, right?
Yeah, the pacement. I mean, we both predicted Moicano to win this one, but the pace of the fight, I mean, I was not, like you said, not surprised with at all. And I mean, like you said, they slowed down in the third round, and I'm like, okay, so you guys definitely don't want to go a championship fight because that's 5, and you barely could handle 3. As you mentioned there, both looked slow, both looked kind of old. I mean, credit to Beneil for getting the win here. Moicano is a good guy for the lightweight division, but no one impressed me in this fight, really.
No, not at all. I think that the reason why we predicted like Moicano to win here is because at least what I saw in the first round was that knockdown. I think Moicano was better on the feet, and he didn't really let Dariush get control, get going in his grappling. And then, you know, the second round, he just started taking him down, and that was it basically. I knew that fight was gonna go to like a decision because Moicano probably won the first round, and then 2 rounds after, probably pretty easy Dariush to score it for him because he had so much control time. So
exactly.
it wasn't at all, even though we predicted Moicano, it wasn't really, far from what we could see. I thought that maybe Moicano could get maybe, from that knockdown, some ground and pound, maybe, piece Dariush up a bit more and maybe a finish even. But was still not surprised.
No, not really. And I think both guys let us down in a bit that they had the chance to make a statement here on a main card. And if a guy got a good knockout or a good finish or really had a good performance, they could have gotten a better fight. But I think in regard to what's next for these guys, Moicano very quickly probably should fight someone unranked on the prelims of an upcoming card. But the interesting one has to be the winner, Beneil Dariush. In my opinion, he should fight someone around his spot and the lower ranks of the lightweight division, possibly like a Rafael Fiziev, maybe a Michael Chandler.
I think Fiziev is a good shout. Maybe Chandler. Agree completely there.
And if either of those win in that kind of fight, they get a bit of a higher rank, maybe a 7 or 8 or something like that, but not really much excitement built from this fight. So a bit of a letdown. And they both look, like you said, quite old and slow here. I think we have to agree on.
Yeah, they looked. I mean, it was a 3-round fight, and sure, there was a lot of grappling in the second round and the third round, but still, they look even more tired than I thought they would during that short fight.
Yeah. It's almost like you look at them and go, you think of it like, okay, guys, weren't you aware that it was 3 5-minute rounds or what happened here? You have been training your whole lives. They almost seemed a bit surprised of the pacing, which wasn't that high. So
no, not even the first round, which was at least a bit better pace. So
yeah, exactly.
I agree. So are we? Yeah, let's move on to the next one because that one wasn't really that exciting. So let's move on to something that wasn't either super exciting, but at least 2 prospects in the bantamweight division. Felipe Lima versus Peyton Talbot, with Talbot picking up I think it was unanimous decision.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Unanimous decision, 3 rounds. What did you gather from that one?
I mean, solid performance from Talbot. He did what I kind of expected him to do in his fight. Even though I picked Lima to win, I was just a bit disappointed in Felipe Lima. If I'm gonna be honest. I more think that the fact that was that he lost this fight more so than Peyton Talbot winning it. Talbot, like I said, just did what we expected him to do. Solid performance, nothing really special in my opinion. But Felipe Lima looked a bit off, a bit random. He threw a lot of special submissions that didn't really make sense.
Yeah, didn't really look like he was like prepared enough. It looked like as if he didn't really have a game plan.
No game plan really.
Yeah, he is
exactly.
He is like I think he displayed, in the first round and the second round he displayed at least some decent technical skill. I think better than Talbot had to offer, but I don't know. He started some combinations. I think he was winning. I think a lot of the striking like exchanges, but then he just didn't really go for it more, and so Talbot just ended up picking up his range again and just throwing out more than him, and then also Lima just started going for random takedowns without really making anything of it, doing some weird sort of submission attempt that didn't really help him. If we
yeah, exactly. And you have to wonder, if is that just the fight IQ of Felipe Lima, or is it his corner that surely it's not his coach that told him to do that, right? I think it just has to be something that he thought himself was a good idea. But sometimes people can come back after a loss like this when he's still pretty young. He has only had a few fights in the UFC, so hopefully Felipe Lima can come back stronger after this one, rebuild and actually solve the issues. This possibly can be the best thing to happen to him, so that he has to have a bit of a rebuild, so to speak, and actually handle the issues in his game. But all the credit to Peyton Talbot picking up the win here, even though it was an underdog going into this fight. and a lot of work to do for Felipe Lima going forward here.
Yeah, completely agree there. So do you see Talbot maybe getting someone in the top 15 rank now, or do you think he has to go for another prelim or another prospect? I mean,
Uh, Difficult to say. Possibly that they give him someone a bit further down the rankings, or maybe another good, not a good contender, but someone outside the rankings. Difficult to say with the UFC in this case. I think what they will do with the matchmaking. I, it was that impressive of a performance, so I would be a
no,
bit surprised if he gets a ranked opponent. What do you think?
yeah, I kind of agree there. I think that if Lima would have won this through, one of his, I don't know, submission attempts or something, I think that, it would be a bit more impressive. I think that Talbot, it was more like he reacted well to everything that Lima did, and he showed that he had a game plan. But I don't think that it was super impressive from Talbot in his win. So he managed to basically just grind it out and got the win. So I don't know. We'll see what the UFC decides to do with him. He's from the US, and I think that he has fought before against Barcelos before. Who I
Oh
think,
yeah.
yeah, he's been ranked, hasn't he?
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
before
and he lost against him. Yes, okay, so he lost against him, and then he got this unranked prospect. So he might, in that case, he's probably going up again, isn't he? Against
might
someone.
be.
Yeah,
Quite possibly, and like you said, since it's American, they might want to try and push him a bit and give him somewhere from the 10th to the 15th spot, just in the hopes of getting him ranked, depending on what the UFC decide to do. But that's a big possibility actually that he gets someone a bit lower down the rankings there.
yeah, exactly. Well, so that was it for our recap, our review of the UFC 317 main card. And so next week or this weekend, there's not going to be any event, not even a fight night. It's next week, but we aren't really going to be covering that one because it's not such a high profile fight night. And then the week after that, there's going to be I think it's the Whittaker, the Ridder.
I think it's Holloway Poirier, right?
No, yeah, it's Holloway Poirier. You're completely right. I mixed them up.
318, yeah.
Yeah, that's one we're going to be covering, 318. But we're not going to be covering the next week's Teixeira, I think, versus Lewis. So we're going to be instead next week we're going to be talking about some topical stuff instead that is unrelated to any current real event going on, right?
Yeah, exactly. And getting the chance to deep dive into some other topics in the UFC world to really pick out some interesting topics. And we look forward to that. Like you said there, that will be coming up next week. And the week after that, we'll be previewing UFC 318 Holloway versus Poirier there.
Yeah.
But yeah, to recap, would you agree that this was a successful card, all out, an entertaining one, 317?
Yeah, I think especially the last three fights, I think. It started sort of wacky with the bantamweight bout between Lima and Talbot. Just yeah, Lima just throwing a bunch of random stuff around and Talbot sort of reacting, and then Moicano, old man Moicano versus old man Darius.
Darius.
Yeah, decision there, and a lot of grappling, a lot of control time in the later rounds, and then we had one of the most amazing fights ever in the flyweight division and in the UFC as a whole, in Van versus Royval, and then after that, of course, Pantoja's dominant performance, and then after that, of course, Ilia's amazing knockouts. So I think that it was actually one of the best cards I think in the recent year. One of the best cards of maybe the best one of 2025 so far. Would you agree?
Yeah, I totally agree. Like you said, the two title fights were finishes from the champs, and Joshua Van versus Brandon Royval was a total all-time classic. So definitely agree with you there. That's quite a spectacular card and one of the best in a long time. thank you guys for listening to this week's episode of the Walkout Podcast. And we look forward to seeing you guys next week for a topical video.
Yeah, so remember to like and subscribe. Thank you. See you next week.